This is Red Pole Q here, and we had a discussion, me and my partner in crime.
Kane Vast.
There we go. I had a discussion already about the book Our Inner Ape by Frans de Waal, and it was a more of a general discussion. And this time around, I thought we could get a little bit more into the more detailed things in the book that I pulled out. So yeah, let's do that.
It's like this, y'all. This is 10% luck, 20% skill, 15% concentrated power of will, 5% pleasure, 50% pain, and 100% reason to remember the name.
All right, let's get into it.
So the first thing that I wanted to bring up is some of the the differences between bonobos and chimps. I already covered that, I think, quite a lot last time when in the initial chat. So I think, but I'll just run through it briefly. And I think the main differences between bonobos and chimps are that bonobos favor more female alliances and strong female alliances and weak male alliances, and chimps are the reverse, with strong male alliances and weak female alliances. So that's one of the main differences, and it seems that a lot of the differences stem from that. So among chimps, because of the strong male alliances, generally what happens is that there will be a strong male or a coalition of maybe two strong males who are at the top, so there's kind of this alpha male, and then there's like a secondary guy who the two of them together can beat out the strongest guy, or it'll be the actual physically strongest guy. Now, being physically strong isn't the only important thing, though, about being the top of chimp society, because as I mentioned yesterday, part of it is being a fair arbiter of disputes. So, if you are near the top, but you are using your sort of power to favor your side more than the other, then you're not going to be very popular, and your reign won't be very stable. And so that's something that is discussed a lot in the book. And he talks about some of the chimp colonies that are being raised in various zoos, and the studies they do on them, and how they watch the various politics basically that happens among them. And essentially the chimps are predominantly male, competing for sexual access to females. The bonobos, on the other hand, it seems that it seems that the females tend to monopolize a lot of the food. The female alliances are what allows them to stand up to the males. And so the primary alliances, since they're from among the primary alliance, because they're between females, the males are generally like clients, essentially, of their mothers. So their mothers are the ones that largely determine what their son's status is. And he didn't really make this totally clear, but it seems that essentially that females have first rights to the food, and I suppose that's because that they are the ones doling out the sex according to. So since they're the ones doling out the sex, basically the males are giving them food, or letting them have first access to the food, and then they say, hey, why don't you share some with me? Conversely, if a male does have food, then a female bonobo will very easily show up, basically start and basically offer herself up, and then while he's in the midst of getting his groove on, she'll pluck the food out of his hand. Which reminds me of do you remember that story about sexual kimchi? He had sex with some girl in China, and then right after she was like, can you take me to the jewelry store now?
No, I don't remember this, but it does sound like a bonobo moment.
So yeah, so I think those are I think those are the main things that are different in bonobo society. Sex is used pretty freely as the currency that of the current the way that women or that the females rather control the males is by offering and withdrawing sexual favors, whereas the chimps primarily control women or the females through territorial possession, sort of being the strongest male and offering kind of protection. So that's I think the main things to think about. Now, obviously, when you look at humans, we kind of do things both ways. I think there's an interplay between female power and male power, and I think that one of the you could definitely make a critique of Western society in saying that it's kind of eroded the whole female power side of the equation, whereas in Asia it's still very much that females use the bonobo way and males often use the way of the chimps, as it were.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It is just on a side note that is somewhat less scientific. Have you seen the new movie, or sort of new in the last few years, of Planet of the Apes?
I saw at least one of them.
So there's three of them, and I've seen all of them. And one thing that is true from what you just said is that the main leader ape is called Caesar, and at some point he gets usurped by another guy. I can't remember the other guy's name, but it's something angry. And the point being that his main quality that makes all of the apes survive or not survive is his ability to mediate between them and the humans and the different ape groups.
Mm-hmm.
So it was interesting because that actually quite clearly displays the point you mentioned, even though it's like a fictional movie.
Right. Well, the reason we, as Jordan Peterson would say, when we watch movies, they're hyper real. They're more real than real. And,
Sure.
what he means by that is that they distill the actual lived experience of human beings, and that's what makes them popular. So makes sense. Yeah. Go JBP.
Yo, ODB, fucking other niggas bros, OPP.
Okay. So there's a lot of parallels, not surprisingly, between ape and ape behavior and human behavior. And so he talks a lot about how the gender differences in the bonobos and the chimps are very similar to the gender differences we see in humans. And, despite the fact that many people are, in the modern times are denying that there are, that gender differences are anything but social constructs, it's pretty clear there's plenty of research to show that is actually absolutely, what's the total bullshit? I think that's the correct word for that. And one of the key examples is about empathy. And I thought this was pretty interesting. So it said that, so he gives us some examples about how females are naturally predisposed to being more empathetic than men and than males. And the reason is because ape offspring, including human children, need a lot of care from their mothers to survive. And so those females that were empathetic towards their children were the ones that reproduced more. And so whereas it wasn't as necessary that that the males be empathetic. So we are relatively more empathetic than like bear males, which will attack and kill their own children, whereas apes will only attack and kill the offspring of other men. I guess that's not something I should be laughing about, but it is interesting. So, and then he gives.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm sure the bears won't mind, and it is good that we're still somewhat removed from the apes to the point where we don't usually go and kill other people's children or any children as a general thing, being a human.
Yeah, that's true. But there's a lot of research to show that that children who live with a step parent have a much higher mortality rate than children raised.
Oh, yeah. I've read that
So,
too. It says
yeah,
a much higher rate of abuse as well.
right, exactly. So, and then the other thing that it says here, which I think will be interesting for our male listeners in particular, and and I think it highlights one of the things that a lot of men maybe forget is that uh, in general men seek empathy from women and not from other men. And there's been this push, which makes sense because men are not particularly empathetic. But there's been this push, in recent Western world to make men more empathetic than they have been traditionally. And he basically is saying that, hey, that's not where men get their that's not where they get their emotional bonding from. They get their emotional bonds from females. And I think that matches my personal experience for sure.
I always assumed that was because a lot of men are raised by their mothers, and again, the mothers are generally going to be more emotionally engaging with the kid, whereas the dad is going to push the kid to just advance in terms of skill in whatever field. So there's like less emotional engagement between them. It could also be a chemical thing too, right?
Oh yeah, but that's the point. Is that so this is something he brings up later. Let me see. Let me scroll forward to find it. And basically, here we go. Here's the quote. Rank determines who will sow his seed far and wide, and who will sow no seed at all. Consequently, males are built to fight, with a tendency to probe rivals for weak spots and a certain blindness to danger. Risk-taking is a male characteristic, as is the hiding of vulnerabilities. In the male primate world, you don't want to look weak. So it's no wonder that in modern society, men go to the doctor less often than women and have trouble revealing their emotions, even with an entire support group egging them on. The popular wisdom is that men have been socialized into hiding emotions, but it seems more likely that these attitudes are the product of being surrounded by others ready to seize any opportunity to bring them down. Our ancestors must have noticed the slightest limp or loss of stamina in others. A high-ranking male would do well to camouflage impairments, a tendency that may have become ingrained. Among chimpanzees, it's not unusual for an injured leader to double the energy he puts into his charging displays, thus creating the illusion of being in perfect shape.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense, especially if you relate it back to humans and you look at kids in school, right?
Yeah.
Because they haven't had as much time to be as socialized. You can see pretty clearly that kids are aware there is a hierarchy that they're operating in, and it's kind of blunt, but I mean, the behaviors that are going to make you gain or fall are pretty obvious. So for guys, I mean, I think it's still the same now for a lot of kids, but for guys, crying in front of other guys automatically gets you labeled as a pussy and probably ostracized or picked on by various groups.
Well, you're definitely not going to be at the top of the hierarchy, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And so I thought that point is interesting, because women think that it's in our interest as men to be more emotional, and they're just totally wrong.
So looking at it through the context of, say, the bonobo society, though, because basically what we've got is where the chimp society, where male relationships and cooperation makes or breaks it in lots of ways, especially, right. I guess, being Westerners in the way we think.
Right.
But if society did lean towards more the bonobo way, then do you think it would be more beneficial to operate in a more female way, where you are more in touch with your emotions and you're kind of developing the social conditioning to try and override some of the evolutionarily programmed stuff?
Right. Well, it's interesting because, you know, so I feel like theoretically, you know, it seems like that would be nice. Yeah, it seems like that would be nice, but I think that human nature is tilted more towards ambition. And the fact that it's tilted more towards ambition means that, you know, we have, like I said, some kind of intermediate. Well, actually, what he says is that we are both more warlike than the chimps and more empathetic than the bonobos. He thinks that we're more extreme on both ends, and
Okay.
and not and in the sense that, you know, we are able to. So he talks about different bonobo troops, and different bonobo troops can meet and they can exchange. You know, not exactly. Yeah, they exchange grooming. You know, so in the chimp world, you know, grooming is basically the equivalent of Netflix and chill. So that's how they, you know, hang out together and sort of build their alliances. And one of the things that it said is that among bonobos, when they meet another bonobo troop at the edge of territory, that you know, they do a bit, but not nearly as much as humans do. You know, humans don't humans engage in trade and business with people that are far removed from their groups, and it doesn't go that far with bonobos. So
Okay.
so that's why he would say in the cooperative empathic side of things, we go beyond bonobos. So I think that, and he talks about this aspect of all right, let me see if I can find it. There's an aspect where he talks about how pretty universally sex is practiced privately, and he explains why that is. Let's see. Oh, it must be here.
I mean, for humans, I would assume it's like a safety thing. Because if you were banging some chick, that would like signal to other people that she's down to get banged, and then they might try to do that if we're like somewhat removed from our current civilized status.
Yeah. So, you know, so that's definitely right. So one of the things is that a large part of the incentive for women to have sex with multiple males. So there's essentially, so he talks about how one of the biggest problems for women or for females of any species is infanticide, you know, the killing of their children, because they've invested a lot. You know, pretty much any mammal invests a lot into the raising of their offspring. I mean, just bringing them to birth is a big deal. And so, you know, they care about each and every one of their offspring quite a lot. But for the males, the offspring are a problem. You know, even traditionally in human beings, when females are lactating, when they're breastfeeding, they can't become pregnant again. And so this is the case with a lot of mammals. And so what a male does, this is in the case of lions, this is in the case of gorillas. Also, when they show up they meet a female and she has a child and they've never had sex with this female, the first thing they try to do is kill the offspring, because now they have a mating chance. You know, they don't go, well, you know, I'll wait for them to raise it for a couple more years and then I'll get in there. They're like, no, let's just kill this one, eliminate some competition, and then we can get the party started. And it's pretty widespread in the mammalian world. Now, obviously, once again, humans are more civilized than this. So instead of doing that, pretty typically, when things were currently, you know, the stepfather just won't take as much care of the stepchild. But it's a far advancement over the past when they would have just enslaved the stepchildren. So
yeah, definitely.
Things are certainly improving. But he let me see if I can find it. Oh, right. So what he was saying is that, a lot of the structures, so there's a few different ways for females to deal with this infanticide problem. And one of the ways is to mate with lots of different males. So by mating with multiple different males, they sort of make it unclear exactly whose child it is. And by making it unclear whose child it is, each male now will become a protector.
Seems pretty sneaky.
This is not the kind of thing that Kane wanted to hear.
Well, I think I already actually knew about this in the way of mentioning it, but yeah, my commentary on it is that it seems like a pretty sneaky tactic.
And there's that one tribe that's pretty famous. Once they believed that what led to pregnancy was a woman accumulating enough semen to become pregnant. And so the idea was that if you mated with multiple males, they would each be contributing their part of their personality or their characteristics to the child. So
that's out of Sex at Dawn, right?
Yeah, he talks about that as Sex at Dawn, but he talks about that in this book as well.
Okay, yeah, I remember reading that.
So that's one. So that's one way of dealing with the infanticide problem is, well, it could be yours, it could be yours, it could be yours. So please everyone be nice. And he talks about, and I read this elsewhere too, the studies that show that that females and the female side of the family is much more likely to say that the child looks like the husband or the supposed father than the male side is. And, I guess they want to reassure the cuck.
Messed up, but it makes sense, I guess.
So that was one thing. So that's one way. But he was saying that the way humans have sort of apparently have decided to deal with this infanticide problem is by the male being so closely engaged with the female that she doesn't really have much of an opportunity.
Yeah, I could see how that works. I mean, lots of guys, when they get into a relationship, they'll drop many other things in their life and just spend all their time with their girl.
Right.
And they also, I read something that said jealousy and the possessiveness that comes with that is potentially a strategy to like keep the girl around. So it was like a reproductive strategy. It wasn't just like a character defect, as what is, I guess, normally believed. I'm not sure if it was a verified thing or not, but it was interesting to think about because it sort of makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it was saying that among bonobos, so first of all, among chimps, the way that the females protect their children from being murdered is they kind of hide during the first few years. They basically try and like hide and forage on their own and try not to encounter any males. And that's like how they protect their children from being murdered because they don't have strong female ties.
Okay.
But they're saying that it seems that
hold on. You're saying for the chimps, right?
The chimps, right.
Okay.
But what bonobos do instead is that that the bonobos basically, by having lots of sex with lots of different males, that's their methodology. So
so they make it all cloudy and muddy, and no one can figure out what's going on. Yeah.
Right. So it says isolation may. This is talking about chimps, female chimps. Isolation may be their primary strategy for prevention of infanticide. They resume swelling. Swellings means the big swellings on their ass that let them that advertise that they're ready for sex. So it says they resume swellings only toward the end of the nursing period after 3 to 4 years. Until this time, they have nothing to offer males looking for sex and no effective way to change the mind of males in an aggressive mood. Female chimps spend a large part of their lives traveling alone with their dependent offspring. Bonobo females, in contrast, rejoin their group right away after having given birth and copulate within months. They have little to fear. Bonobo males are not in any position to know which offspring are theirs. And since female bonobos tend to be dominant, attacking their offspring would be a risky business.
Yeah, the bonobos just seem like such sluts.
So here we go. And this is what it says about humans. Instead of following the bonobo model, our species has chosen its own way. Two elements women share with bonobos are that their ovulation is hidden from immediate detection and that they have sex throughout their cycle. But here, the similarities end. So let me see. Where does it say? So then he talks about a lot about the swellings, and that's kind of not important for our purposes. Okay, the second way we deviate from bonobos is that sex among humans is more restrained. So yes, but you're right, bonobos are sluts. The second way in which we deviate, this is not always evident because some societies know extraordinary freedom. The peoples of the Pacific were a case in point before the arrival of Westerners. In The Sexual Life of Savages, which is a book by Bronislaw Malinowski, depicted this region's cultures as having few taboos or inhibitions. In a rather bonobo-esque comment, it has been said that for early Hawaiians, sex was a salve and a glue for the total society. And then he talks about more stuff about Hawaiians, but it says here that unrestrained hedonism, however, is unlikely to have existed in any human culture. Even the most sexually liberal cultures are not free from jealousy and violence in response to unfaithfulness. Universally, intercourse takes place in private, and the genital region tends to be hidden. Most societies also limit sex to a few partners. Polygamy may be practiced and accepted, but in reality, the vast majority of families in the world include only one man and one woman. Now, the nuclear family is the hallmark of human social evolution. Given the exclusivity of our sexual contacts, we've opted for the opposite of the bonobo plan by actually enhancing a male's ability to tell which offspring are his. Until modern science came along, men could never be sure, but had a far better chance of guessing right than a bonobo does.
Yeah, so I guess with the whole nuclear family thing, as far as I remember from reading Sex at Dawn, I think it was, the point of that was that it was around when we went from being tribal to agricultural, and we had stuff that we would pass along from father to son instead of just sharing in a community, because we reached like a large number of people living together and then living more independently than as a group.
Right.
And that's why being your father's son, for again lots of legal reasons, seems to be quite a big deal nowadays.
Right. Well, so it seems like there's, this is one of those things that I think is still quite up for debate in the scientific community. So I think his assertion that nuclear families have been the norm, it's hard to be sure that that's true. But one suggestion for that, for why that might likely have been true, is this concept, in Sex at Dawn, or not the concept in Sex at Dawn, the idea that before agriculture, there wasn't a lot of surplus. And so the idea that there wasn't a lot of surplus, and since there wasn't a lot of surplus, it wasn't likely, or it wasn't in a man's interest to to try and have multiple females. And so each female ended up with one male. Now that's one idea. Another idea is to say that they just shared everything, including the women. And it was more like bonobos. And that's what Sex at Dawn seems to think. They think that the writers of Sex at Dawn think, hey, you know, they shared everything else communally. They probably shared sexual partners as well. I don't think we have, well, certainly I don't have enough evidence one way or the other. I mean, it could be either way. What we do know is that when it was possible to accumulate wealth, polygamous groupings became much more common, with a male who had a lot having multiple females, and it shifting more towards a gorilla type situation. So, you know, who knows if the nuclear family is really the norm. That's his assertion. I don't know.
Yeah, it is kind of hard to say.
But I think the point still stands that the main point, though, is that bonobos, because of the strong female alliances, are not in a position to go and take out the females, the children of females they haven't mated with anyway.
Okay.
And I think that's kind of the most important point, is that the males, because they don't have a strong alliance system, aren't in a position to do that. Whereas the chimps are in a position to do that, because the strong male alliance, if they find a female who has offspring and none of them have been with her, they can go, okay, well, it's definitely not of ours, so let's take her out. Let's take out this little kid. And you know, among gorillas, I mean, that's the way it entirely works. It's just like the gorilla. I mean, presumably maybe because there are no, there's neither male alliances nor female alliances, maybe. And so because of that, the male gorilla, you know, can easily, the strongest one can just dominate his harem, period. Maybe that's how it works.
Okay.
So, yeah. Right. Okay, so what was the next thing that I wanted to? Oh, yeah, so it seemed to say that in a situation where there was a quote in here that I thought was really good. He basically says that in a situation where it's primarily a matriarchal society, it pays to be a mama's boy.
Yeah, that makes a messed up sort of sense.
Yeah, here it is. In nature, bonobo females do all the migrating, leaving their home group at puberty. Now, the reason why the females leave the group is because they can enter a new group, and, you know, they have something to offer in terms of the fact that they can offer up sex, whereas males can't do that. So males stay put, enjoying the company and protection of their mothers. Males with influential mothers rise in the hierarchy and are tolerated around food. Zoos have learned the hard way that they need to follow this example. Unfortunately, and this is talking about a male that they transferred. So unfortunately, the male in question had been brought in from the outside. Being real mama's boys, males fare best in the group in which they were born. So there you go. So, you know, this one of the interesting things about modern society is that largely there's been they've tried to put men in more of this situation where the world is a lot safer for them if they just follow along with the rules, which I think is, you know, in the old days, you didn't want to follow the rules. I mean, you know, the way to win was you get on a horse, you grab a bunch of your buddies, and you just go and rampage.
Yeah. Good old days.
And what they're saying now is, hey, you know, just stay put, follow the rules, and things will work out for you. But the problem, of course, is twofold. One, that your rank is dependent on your mom. And, you know, male humans seem to have too much ambition to be satisfied with that situation. And secondly, female women are not sufficiently attracted to mama's boys for it to be a very successful reproductive strategy.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to think how that would affect things, considering the difference with men and women in terms of how competitive women aren't in their natural inclinations, right? So again, it's like a Jordan Peterson thing. But I mean, if women are less willing to be competitive than men because of their natural predispositions, it'd be interesting to see how that would affect things if, to get ahead in society, it's designed that you need to kind of like be a mama's boy.
Right.
Because mama's boys, maybe a lot of these really big successful people who build a lot of stuff are mama's boys, but I somehow kind of doubt it.
There's little evidence to suggest that.
Yeah, I don't see Genghis Khan being a mama's boy in any particular way.
Right. Did we talk about, oh yeah, we did talk about stress issues. Now there's something really interesting, because what he said in this book somewhat contradicted what I saw in a documentary a long time ago called Stress: Portrait of a Killer. In that documentary, they suggested that the higher you are up in the social dominance hierarchy, the less stress you have. And the reason you have less stress when you're higher up is because when you're higher up, you have more levers of control. So you have things more arranged the way you want them to be arranged. In this book, however, he said that high-ranking males often have very high stress levels. And so there's some, so I'm a little bit unsure, why there were these two different diverging results. Although in the TED Talk that this writer, Frans de Waal, gave, he said that the highest ranking male has high stress levels and the second highest ranking male has the lowest stress levels. And then the stress levels gradually rise as you get further down the hierarchy. And I thought that was pretty interesting, and it makes a lot of sense. They basically say that, when you're low on the social hierarchy, then your stress levels are high because lots of bad things can happen to you, essentially. And among chimps, for example, low-ranking chimps have to spend most of their time at the edges of the group's territory. And at the edges of the group's territory, they're very much vulnerable to the roving packs of rival troops that kind of stalk the perimeter looking for lone chimps that they can take down and murder. And I think I mentioned that in the last talk. So it makes sense. And I'd say that, in our society, it's also very true. Low-ranking male basically means that you don't have much income. You have an insecure job. You have you likely, certainly in the American system, you likely don't have access to health care. Your housing isn't very comfortable or very good. Your utilities are at risk of getting cut off. I mean, there's all these things that, random event is more likely to lead to things turning out really badly for you.
Sure.
And, obviously high-ranking males have a lot going for them in the sense that, bad things aren't that bad for them. So, so that's a clear indication. Now, as I was saying, one of the things is that bonobos live in a much more abundant world in terms of food. So there's not that same competition where it's winner take all. And actually, they were talking about this, how among bonobos, there's a very close male to, so their birth rate is similar to ours in that the ratio of females to males is 50-50 at birth, or approximately 50-50 at birth. And it's also the case among chimps. But when you actually study chimp populations, it's closer to only about, there's about half the number of males for females. So along the line, about 50% of males end up getting murdered before reaching adulthood or soon into adulthood. And he even gave a story about, there was 3 chimps who competed against, who there was a one chimp alliance, and then there was another male chimp who was like the strongest. And so this male alliance at one point cornered this, the powerful chimp at night when there was no one there to, none of the other people in the troop could intervene. And they cornered him.
Okay.
They held him down. One of them held him down while the other inflicted serious bite wounds to him, including biting his scrotum and squeezing out his testicles.
That is some fucked up shit.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't wish that on anyone, right?
No.
And so the male, the competition is quite fierce among chimps. And I think looking back at human history, we can say that, there definitely is a strong streak of that among humans.
Yeah, I guess that's that's very true.
Yeah. Although, it's nice one of the good things about being a human is that if you decide you want to do that to a male rival, you don't have to bite his scrotum with your teeth. So that's nice.
Yeah, we don't teach any of that in boot camp.
I already talked about this thing about males having to hide their weaknesses, and I think that one of the things and I know you've experienced this during your time teaching social dynamics and relationships and dating, is that one of the things we grow up thinking is that women really understand other people very well, and it's men that are total retards. But what you really find is that women have a lot of wishful thinking about how men should be.
Yeah, I think that's very, very accurate.
And, this idea that they have that, men should be open to being more vulnerable and open is one of those areas where women have no understanding of the kind of competitive pressure that men are under in the hopes of getting some action.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
And now there is something that was very interesting that he said in here. He said that oftentimes female chimps are pickier maters than bonobo females are. And because they're pickier maters, it can be that even though you are the alpha male of the chimp troop, the females will be running off to a mate with lower ranking males. And this is interesting because I think, in Western pickup in particular, there's this strong belief that if you're just super alpha, that you'll get all the girls.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, you could just use Dan Bilzerian as the effect for that, but it is sort of true in his case that it's not just his alphaness, but that's how people would perceive it, I think.
Right. And so the fact is that, you don't have to be that there are incentives for females, or females for whatever reason may not just choose the most alpha guy. And I think that's important for many guys who are learning pickup to understand, because they often feel like they have to become something or a particular way. And, they don't have to.
Sure. I'm with you on that.
There was something else he talks about. He talks about voice convergence. So voice convergence is this idea that men, there's a certain frequency, there's like an underlying frequency to interactions between humans. And they've done some research showing that the lower ranking males will match their frequency to the higher ranking males. And so frequencies, when groups interact, they always converge, but it's always the lower ranking male who matches his frequency.
Okay.
So here you go. I'll read a quote from the book. Scientists used to consider the frequency band of 500 hertz and below in the human voice as meaningless noise, because when a voice is filtered, removing all higher frequencies, one hears nothing but a low-pitched hum. All words are lost. But then it was found that this low hum is an unconscious social instrument. It is different for each person, but in the course of a conversation, people tend to converge. They settle on a single hum, and it is always the lower status person who does the adjusting. So there's some, we often tell guys about how they use their voice tonality as part of their interactions, right?
Yep.
And so this is a great example of how that is important in terms of displaying your dominance level.
So just to recap on that briefly, you're saying that how you use your voice signals your value level in relation to the person you're interacting with one way or another, right?
Right, exactly. So it's more that, if your voice tonality it's actually a frequency, but I think it's more about tonality in terms of how we use it. If you converge to match somebody else, then that's an indicator that you're lower ranking than that person.
Okay, interesting. So how do you think that would work in terms of someone having, say, a higher voice than someone else? And then basically, if it's like skill-wise more difficult for them to match that person, how do you think that would affect things?
Well, I think it's not about the voice tonality being higher or lower. It's more about it just being the one that people match.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily to say that you have to have a lower voice for people for you to be more dominant. Although that seems to be actually the voice, how deep your voice is largely a testosterone marker, actually. So higher testosterone levels. I'm not exactly sure how this works. I think the way it works is there is some point when you're marked as being a male, before puberty, when you're still in the womb, you get some flooding of testosterone or something like that. And then that indicates your responsiveness to testosterone in the future when you pass puberty. I think that's how it works. And so the ones who get a higher flooding of testosterone in the womb then will develop into they will have more traditional male markers, square jaws, deep voices, that sort of thing, wide shoulders.
Okay.
So I think that how deep your voice is more of a testosterone marker than it is an indicator of dominance. Although, generally speaking, women are attracted to males with more testosterone markers. And there seems to be an issue about how testosterone is deadly, actually. Like, it's kind of poisonous, and the more testosterone you have in your system, the more susceptible you are to sickness and parasites and cancer and all sorts of bad stuff. And the way that works is that if you're very high in testosterone, but you're healthy, then that indicates that your genes must be really, really good. And it's similar to the peacock feathers, where it's difficult to maintain those because you're easy to spot by predators. So if you maintain really great feathers, it just shows that you must be so good that even though, you're running through the wolf kennel with meat strapped all around your body, you can still survive. Something like that.
That's a pretty funny way to put it.
Yeah, and then he talks about how men, when they meet each other, they have sort of a confrontational interaction in the beginning, and it's kind of them pushing at each other to figure out where each of them are in the dominance hierarchy. And of course, you've experienced this many times, because when you teach pickup, every time you meet someone who finds out that you teach pickup, it's like immediately them trying to prove how amazing and awesome they are and how they're better than you with chicks and sex and everything you can think of.
Yeah, it is interesting because it's like our most core. Sex is our most core, and our ability to get it and get it and have it and all that is our most core kind of defining thing, I think. And it's funny how that riles people, and that
Mhm.
it's working on a logical level and also like a biological one.
Now, interestingly, there was something here that he brought up that indicated something interesting about how a male might interact with someone else when when the social dominance hierarchy is in flux, basically. So he talks about that you have the alpha male. So one of the things that he said is that among chimps, you have like the alpha male, but until the other males submit, there is still the competition is still on. And the way that chimps submit is through something called a pant grunt. I don't know what that sounds like, but anyway, it's called a pant grunt. I suppose if you go on YouTube, you could probably look up chimp pant grunt and find out. And maybe we'll splice it in to the right here. Maybe we'll splice it in. That could be cool. So it says here, the challenger, so that's, the challenger to the existing alpha, will not lighten up until the former alpha submits. In effect, the contender is telling the fallen king that the only way to be friends again will be to give the pant grunts that admit defeat. It is pure blackmail. The challenger is waiting for the alpha to cry uncle. On many an occasion, I have seen a male who failed to pant grunt when approaching a new alpha find himself standing alone. The alpha simply moves away. Why bother with someone who doesn't recognize your position? Only when rank issues have been settled will rivals reconcile and calm be restored. The clearer the hierarchy, the less need for reinforcement.
So far, and again, it's a kind of a Loby example, but so far, everything you're saying, I think, has been pretty accurately portrayed in Planet of the Apes, at least the newer movies of it.
Mm-hmm.
And something they do there is there's a particular gesture of submission where they put their hand out, palm up, and they do make some sort of sound. So it'll be interesting to give those movies a rewatch and like look for these things, because I'm pretty sure they've done it all really accurately.
Yeah, he talks about the movies in here, and I guess they used some really some real primate. They really tried to follow a lot of the science in terms where they brought in primatologists as consultants for some of the behavior. And he talks about some of the things that are spot on and some of the things that are off. But yeah. So one of the things that I thought was most interesting here was this idea that basically if one of the males didn't acknowledge the other male as dominant, then they would just sort of not interact with each other at all. And when you were asking me about Mark Manson yesterday or the other day when we were talking about it, I remembered how this seems very much like what happened when I went to join his group. So he was there talking to with his now wife, but she was his girlfriend at the time, and there were two other women. And so I went and approached the group, and I ended up interacting with some of the women, and he just left. And it was interesting because when I read this part of the book, I thought, oh, this is maybe exactly what was happening, where he was like, okay, I'm not coming over and being like, oh, Mark Manson, you're so amazing. I love your stuff. Wow. And because of that, it was like, he just left. And I think you've experienced this many times with pickup artists that you've encountered as well, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, the only exception probably was maybe Bad Boy, and the rest of them are all very, very similar in that way. If you don't like bow down before them in all their awesomeness and glory, then they kind of get all uppity in the same way you're describing Mark Manson did.
Right, right, and it's pretty interesting. I mean, yeah, it was pretty interesting for me. But the other thing that I thought from this is I thought, oh, I never realized that that is a perfectly valid way of handling the situation. I mean, I never really think in that way. I mean, it's something that I guess we probably tend to do when a guy comes over and talks to us. We don't really engage him that strongly, although we certainly give them the opportunity, I think, but we don't. Yeah. Anyway, it was pretty interesting. I thought this when I read that. Let's see. Oh, and then he talks about why it can be good to be the beta male. And I've talked about this before. It's sort of what do they say? No one is trying to take out the guy who's in fourth place, right?
Yeah. You mentioned this yesterday.
Right. And so he says that this brings me to the greatest paradox, which is that although positions within a hierarchy are born from contest, the hierarchical structure itself, once established, eliminates the need for further conflict. Obviously, those lower on the scale would have preferred to be higher, but they settle for the next best thing, which is to be left in peace. The frequent exchange of status signals reassures bosses that there is no need for them to underline their position by force. And I think, a lot of this stuff that they're talking about in Western world about how men are not engaged in the world very much is very much what's going on here. There's this book, I haven't read it yet. I only read the beginning part, called Man Interrupted by Zimbardo. And he talks about, and there's a lot of, TED Talks and video and YouTube talks about how men just don't see any point in competing anymore. And they're just like, all right, fuck it. I'll just stay where I am, because there aren't many gains to be had from competing anymore.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, okay, that makes sense, I suppose.
Why compete why compete when you can just get on Tinder and start swiping and have some bonobo-esque female come straight to your house and give you some action? She may not be good, but at least she's got a vagina.
Yeah, you can do the whole pick fleas and hang. That's the monkey version of Netflix and chill, right?
Right. Let's see. What else did I want to bring up? Oh yeah, he talks about this. So there he gives this example about some red-winged blackbirds, and red-winged blackbirds have monogamous pairings, yeah. So scientists hope to control a population of red-winged blackbirds by vasectomizing the males. They thought that nesting pairs with sterile males would produce sterile clutches. To their dismay, the majority of clutches were fertile, meaning that the female must have been, quote unquote, seeing intact males on the side.
So basically, another case of a slutty animal in the animal kingdom.
Exactly.
First, the bonobos are being all slutty, and now we've got slutty red birds.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
The whole world's going to shit. We're done.
And he says he gives another example, and I think you probably I think this was brought up. I can't remember. Oh, this was brought up in the book. What was the name of that book? It was one of the recent books that highlighted research on females, sexual research. I can't remember the name of the book off the top of my head, but I'll link it below. But anyway, here we go. Surveys grossly underestimate women's sex lives. Everybody, especially women, is reluctant to reveal the truth. We know this because there is a way of getting women to talk. Hook up college students to a fake lie detector machine, and young women report almost twice as many sex partners as women feeling no such pressure. In fact, they report as many partners as their male counterparts. So men and women may be far more similar than sex surveys have made us believe.
So basically, women are banging. At least it's hard to say. I guess in the West is what you're referring to. I imagine, right?
Although I'm very sure that it's not different in Asia.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. I mean, I've just ran into my own biases, and then I'm trying to outmaneuver them at the moment because the jerk reaction in my brain is like, no, Asia's definitely different. But then you look at it and it's like, well, there are a lot of people here.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, you know, I think that in a lot of ways, I would argue that the gap between what Asian women are doing and what they say they're doing or appear to be doing is probably wider than in the West. But that's largely because culturally, wide gaps between reality and image are acceptable and preferred in Asian culture anyway.
Yeah, that's very true.
Right. So in the West, it's like, you know, women are supposed to be more honest about what they're doing. So, you know, like I was just talking to a guy on the phone today, and he broke up with, or this girl stopped seeing him. You know, she wanted more from the relationship and wanted it to move forward towards marriage. And he is very likely an avoidant attachment style person. So he sort of is going, oh yeah, well, let's just keep things as they are. You know, where she was very nice to him and very sexually available to him. And then, you know, she decided to cut things off, and he's, you know, quite upset about that. And in the 2 months since she stopped seeing him, she's banged 4 dudes. And now, actually, what he told me is she had 2 flings and 2 boyfriends. And when he told me this, I said, she had 2 boyfriends in 2 months. I don't think that's not what I would call a boyfriend. And he's like, okay,
it's interesting.
4
It's
flings.
interesting that he's still like subconsciously idolizing her or maintaining this, like potentially maintaining this pure image of her by even accepting mentally that she's had boyfriends.
Yeah.
Because realistically, in terms of the behavior, she's just hoeing around and she's banging like a new dude, what, every 2 weeks?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, basically.
So either she's like swapping them out each time, or she's like continuing to bang these dudes on the regular.
Right.
And that's not, obviously that's not like boyfriend girlfriend behavior, because boyfriend girlfriend behavior implies investment, and there doesn't seem to be much of that other than like hot beef injections.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, so it made me think about that, and you know, and I met a girl when I first moved to Taiwan, and I think she told me that she'd been with 13 guys, but she'd actually been with like 25, and she had gone on this thing about trying to collect as many flags as possible, you know, like different bang dudes from different countries. And, you know, she said 13, but, you know, when she asked me about it, you know, she told me the truth eventually because she realized that I just really didn't care. But I was telling her that I think she should still say less than 13. I think 13 for most guys is too many. She was only 25. So even though 13 at 25 actually isn't that many, I mean, if she's been banging dudes since she was 18, that's 7 years. That's only 2 dudes a year. It's not many, really. I mean, especially given how many offers women get.
So it's funny, this actually relates back to the American Pie rule, and I might not have this 100% accurate, but in American Pie, that movie, I don't know if you remember that movie.
Oh yeah. I thought that movie was really funny, and I used to tell Japanese girls they should watch it if they want to see how Americans think about sex.
Yeah, it's actually really good for that. But do you remember the part where they say, when men say they've had sex with X amount of girls, it's usually like double or triple the amount of girls they actually had sex with. And when girls say how many guys they've had sex with, it's actually half of what is actually real.
Right.
So it's kind of funny that pans out.
Yeah, because I think that like a guy would include something like, you know, like maybe the girl like like a guys would include a situation where he feels he could have had sex, but it didn't happen for some reason.
Well, this is like the Chinese pickup guys. One of them developed this really funny thing, and in Chinese, it's Chinese pickup slang. It's called ban ti, and yeah, it just means half clothes, literally.
Oh.
So they would count that as like them banging a girl, and the joke went on to be a bunch of things. Like if you were in the same room as a girl, it's like a half clothes. So I kind of see how that works.
Right.
Kind of
Whereas like, for example, if a guy was like, oh, well, we were in bed totally naked, but we didn't do anything because we didn't have a condom. So basically I closed her. Or like maybe I just like masturbated onto her and I blew a load on her chest. For a guy, that counts. The girl would be like, what do you mean? Nothing really happened.
There's actually a really funny meme on the internet I've seen about this, which is, I think, called the Later Virgins meme. And it basically goes like, I went to a clothing store, I touched a coat hanger, and the girl who worked at the clothing store also touched that coat hanger. I used that hand to touch my penis. So technically, I had sex with that girl. Later Virgins. The same sort of thing.
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny because for me, like the first time I ever had my penis inside a vagina, I was like so terrified of getting her pregnant. I didn't have any condoms. So I just like put it in and took it out. And then like we did other stuff. And then later on I put it in and took it out again. And I didn't even really consider that to have been real sex. Like I kind of didn't really feel like I'd lost my virginity.
Fair enough.
But I guess most guys would be like, I fucked her.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a 2-hour long saga at that point for most guys, apparently. Just going back to the guy you were talking about who was saying his now ex-girl has banged like 4 dudes.
Yeah.
Do you think that he is potentially viewing it this way because of some like evolutionary psychology reason where he's finding ways to accept the situation and therefore accepting like a lower position in the hierarchy with this girl because he like wants to get back with her?
You know, I think it's definitely, you know, in his interest to imagine that these other guys are, you know, not, for example, not better than him. I mean, I think all guys do this. It's like, they're not better. It's just that she couldn't get me. So that's why she's with these other guys.
Okay.
So in that sense, yeah, it kind of is, you know, a social dominance thing where it's like, well, you know, she couldn't get like the alpha, so she'll take one of the betas kind of. Instead of just being like, yeah, maybe this guy's just better than me.
Yeah. Okay.
I was also actually it was talking about this tendency among men. Also, it said that in the males in some primate group, I can't remember which one, it was saying that the males who were very good at displacing their anger onto lower ranking males had much lower stress levels than those who didn't.
So the males, you're saying male monkeys that were able to like...
I think these were apes.
Okay, so you're saying apes that were able to take out their anger on males lower than them had lower levels of stress.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
I think, let me see if I can find it. Yeah, reallocation of blame fails to address the situation that triggered it, but it works. It serves to calm the frayed nerves and restore sanity. Only one study has measured it in a most innovative way, not in people, but in baboons. Right, baboons. Primatologists have come up with the guidelines for what makes for a successful male baboon. The measure of success is the amount of glucocorticoid, a stress hormone that reflects how one is doing psychologically in the blood. Low levels mean that one copes well with the ups and downs of social life. which for male baboons is full of status striving, slights, and challenges. It was found that displacement of aggression is an excellent personality trait for a baboon to have. As soon as a male has lost a confrontation, he takes it out on some smaller guy. Males who tend to do so enjoy relatively stress-free lives. Rather than withdrawing and sulking after a defeat, they're quick to shift their problems to others.
Yeah, it sounds pretty messed up.
Well, I mean, but humans do that sort of thing all the time. So, why get rid of a winning strategy?
Yeah, I mean, this was making me think of when I was working in like some soulless organization in Australia as a salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because we had a manager who was pretty inept, and I don't know how he got hired there, but the point is I'd been at that business longer than he had. So I knew how to do the day-to-day tasks in the area that we were working. And there were some points where he had given myself and a bunch of other people instructions on what he wanted us to do, but his
Mm-hmm.
instructions weren't very clear or just like didn't make a lot of sense. And then you could see when he would try to do what you were just talking about, where
Mm-hmm.
he would probably try and take out his negative emotion on us, the people under him. So it's interesting thinking about this and relating it back to my own experiences or my own observations in life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there you go. So he had low stress levels, but you had higher stress levels because of it. Lucky you.
Yay.
Let's see. Yeah, once again, he really thinks that the idea of the pair bond is really much more the standard human condition. Obviously, Sex at Dawn disagrees with that, but he thinks that that the pair bond is what sets us apart from other apes.
Does it have any in-depth information on how we developed that as a strategy or a function compared to other apes?
Yeah, so this is related to, yes, here we go. Yeah, he has quite a lot to say about that. He says, our species' social order revolves around the pair bond model, which gave our ancestors a foundation for building cooperative societies to which both sexes contributed and in which both felt secure. It has been speculated that the nuclear family arose originally from a male tendency to accompany females with whom they had mated so as to keep infanticidal rivals at bay. Such an arrangement could have been expanded to include paternal care. For example, the father could have helped his companion locate trees with ripe fruits, capture and share prey, or carry their young. He himself would have profited from her talent for precision tool use. Female apes are more skillful than males, and her gathering of nuts and berries. The female, in turn, may have begun offering sex so as to keep her protector from running off with every good-looking passerby. The more both parties put into the arrangement, the higher the stakes. Thus, it became increasingly important to the male that his mate's offsprings were his and only his.
Okay.
If there is no free lunch in nature, if bonobo females paid for their arrangement with almost continuous swellings, that means they have to be always very sexually available to men. Women paid for theirs with diminished sexual freedom. And the motivation for male control only increased when our ancestors settled down from a nomadic existence and began to accumulate material goods. In addition to passing on genes to the next generation, they were now also inheriting wealth. The size difference between the sexes, combined with excellent cooperation among males, makes it likely that male dominance has always characterized our lineage, and so inheritance likely followed paternal lines. With every male trying to ensure that his life savings ended up in the right hands, those of his own progeny, an obsession with virginity and chastity became inevitable. Patriarchy, as it's known, can be thought of simply as an outgrowth of male assistance with the rearing of offspring. So yeah, that's what he has to say about that.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting on the comment. Actually, before I jump into this, I'll just quickly. Do you want me to read a blurb about on Wikipedia about what pair bonding is, just in case we've got some people who
Yeah,
don't
great idea.
know about pair
Go
bonding?
for it.
Okay, so there's the one that covers animals, and there's one that then goes on humans, and they're quite short, so I'll just do them. In biology, a pair bond is the strong affinity that develops in some species between a pair consisting of a male or female. A male and female. And just to throw it out there, there are only two genders, male and female. Just anyone who's enraged by that, please be enraged. Also, or in some cases, as a same-sex pairing. And yeah, that part I don't get. It's weird, but we'll just move along. Potentially leading to producing offspring and or a lifelong bond. Pair bonding is a term coined in the 1940s that is frequently used in sociobiology and evolutionary biology circles. The term often implies either a lifelong socially monogamous relationship or a stage of mating interaction in socially monogamous species. It is sometimes used in reference to human relationships. Monogamous voles, such as prairie voles, have significantly greater density and distribution of vasopressin receptors in their brain when compared to polygamous voles. These differences are located in the ventral forebrain and the dopamine-mediated reward pathway. All right, so this part's getting a bit dense and a bit irrelevant, so I'm going to jump to the human part. Humans can experience some or all of the above-mentioned varieties of pair bonds in their lifetime. These bonds can be temporary or last a lifetime, same age or different age groups. In a biological sense, there are two main types of pair bonds exhibited in humans: social pair bonding and sexual pair bonding. The social pair bond is a strong behavioral and psychological relationship between two individuals that is measurably different in physiological and emotional terms from general friendships or other acquaintance relationships. On the other hand, the sexual pair bond is a behavioral and a physiological bond between two individuals with a strong sexual attraction component. In this bond, the participants in the sexual pair bond prefer to have sex with each other over other options. Social pair bonds are usually more wide-ranging than their sexual counterparts due to the sexual nature involved in the latter. In humans and other mammals, these pair bonds are created by a combination of social interaction and biological factors including neurotransmitters like oxytocin, vasopressin, and dopamine. Pair bonds, social and or sexual, do not equal marriage. Marriage can be associated with sexual and social pair bonds. However, married couples do not necessarily have to experience both or either of these bonds. Marriage can be a consequence of pair bonds and vice versa. However, neither always creates or leads to the other. Pair bonding in humans helps explain extreme bonds that we may share with others, but we are unable to articulate in terms of contemporary love. So when you look at the variety of pair bonds, and I guess I'll just cover that because it is really, really quite short. According to evolutionary psychologists David P. Barash and Judith Lipton from their 2001 book, The Myth of Monogamy, there are several varieties of pair bonds. Short-term pair bond, which is a transient mating or association. Long-term pair bond, bonded for a significant portion of the life cycle of that particular pair. Lifelong pair bond, mated for life, right? I'm sure there's some birds that did that. Social pair bond, attachments for territorial or social reasons, as in cuckold situations. Clandestine pair bond, quick extra pair copulations. That's a weird one. Dynamic pair bond, and this is like the gibbon monkey thing, mating systems. So it says, given mating systems being analogous to swingers.
Ah, analogous to swingers. Got it.
Yeah, so analogous. My English is failing. So yeah, that's pretty freaky. And it is actually really interesting. One part of this, let me just find it again. It was talking about, say, the two different types of pair bonds that humans generally do, which one was social and one was sexual.
Right.
And the sexual one is predicated on having strong sexual attraction.
Right.
So it's interesting if you think about this, because people, I guess, generally start out having the sexual one, and then because I think we're programmed to need a fair amount of variety, once that fades, the sexual pair bond seems to like go down the shitter, and then all you've got left would be the social one. And then if couples aren't maintaining that by, I guess, being social together in terms of how they treat each other and how they spend their time, it's easy to see how relationships then fail, because you've got the two kind of pair bonds working in sync, I assume.
Right.
And then slowly failing, and then the relationship goes to shit. But people look at that and then blame personal characteristics without being aware of the underlying dynamics or science.
Right.
And that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I remember that book that I mentioned earlier about research on female sexuality, a sort of compilation of recent research, was saying that there is some evidence to suggest that women only maintain sexual attraction for the same mate for about 4 years. And they were talking about how there is a search for a female Viagra, because the fact that women are not sexually attracted to their husbands is creating, problems in their marriages.
Yeah, it would be a really big problem, especially once you take out the kind of somewhat enforced monogamy via social pressure, and then you mix in the legal issues in terms of who gets what, and people divorcing, and how that affects kids, and then how those kids grow up, and how those kids are all messed up because they don't have a stable family life, etc., etc.
Right, and he talks about this too. So let me before he talks about this too. He says women seek as much protection and care as they can get, and men are drawn into this by sexual relations. Sometimes women consider brothers more reliable helpers than their mates might be, but the typical human pattern by far is a sex for food deal between a man and a woman with children attached.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
They basically take her out, chuck some food down her yap, and bang, and that's it. That's evolutionary psychology at work.
It's interesting. When I was reading the game, I don't know if you remember this, but they had this idea. I don't know why it was called this, but they called it rocks for gold. And gold was sex, and rocks are, nice things that you do for women, take them out, feed them, take care of them in various ways. So they called it rocks for gold. And if there's an imbalance, then the relationship doesn't work out.
Yeah, I don't remember, but I get what you mean. It is quite interesting now that you've got like lots of social things that mess with the natural order of things, like Tinder, for example, meaning that the girls don't even get rocks. They just come along and give you the gold, and then you're like, all right, here's your taxi, go away now, right?
Right.
I think that's like a really messed up dynamic.
Well, in a certain extent, but one of the things that's interesting is that so in the animal kingdom, it tends to be that the females pursue one of two strategies. Strategy one is find the best genes. Strategy two is find the best provider. Although there is some suggestion that good genes will make you a good provider. But anyway, those are the two strategies. But it seems that with human females they can follow either strategy or they follow both strategies. And so Tinder, for example, leans more heavily towards the good gene strategy. It's like, girls are on there. They only want to, it's like, how tall are you? If you're not tall enough, you're out. If you don't have a six pack, you're out. I read something that said that it's like something like 80% of women are competing for like 5% of the guys on Tinder or something like this. Like the bottom 80% of women are competing for the top 5% of guys, something like that. And then, and the ratio on the guy side is like even worse.
Yeah, it is pretty messed up.
And, and I think this is kind of one of the major problems of our time, which is that because people are not seeing are not interacting with each other in enough sort of spheres, they have a very limited perspective on one another. And so they're not judging each other by the wealth of their entire personality experience and et cetera. And so that's quite detrimental. More detrimental for women actually than it is for men in a certain respect, because the women are often ideally trying to seek a partner who is the best partner, the best genes they can get, who will stick around long term, essentially.
Yeah, so I see what you mean with this. And I guess we're just in an adjustment period because the internet and various applications and ways of people interacting with each other is changing so much that the way we would compensate, I think, hasn't come around yet. And I was actually talking to this old Chinese woman the other day that my friend was friends with and introduced me to. And she's like some OG meditation expert, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the point being, she was having trouble relating to her son because she said that her son spent all his money buying a gaming computer instead of giving money to his grandparents or something. And it was like his first pay he ever got, because he just got a job and worked for a month and got this money. And the Chinese thing would be that traditionally you give a present at least, or maybe buy dinner for your grandparents and your parents, because they've already spent all these years raising you. So it's like a way to say thank you to them.
Right.
And she was saying that he seems like totally unreasonable and ungrateful, and she couldn't understand the behavior. And beyond that, he doesn't want to do lots of things that she would think is kind of normal for her day and age. And then she had similar problems because she teaches engineering. So she was saying that she had similar issues with the kids that she teaches. They're just not really interested. And the way this relates to what we're talking about now is that I think because of technology and the ability to interact with people in all these weird ways, there's a lot of things that are becoming very, very narrow. So how this relates to women and Tinder and stuff like that, you only get a very narrow perspective of people because although we have new ways to interact with others, they're just much more narrow than the traditional way. So like if you talk to a girl on Tinder, I mean, you just have a one-sided kind of view of who she is until you meet her. Whereas if you like approached her in the street, you've already got a really broad idea of who she is, even if you've spent 5 minutes on Tinder versus 5 minutes on the street.
Right.
So it's a little bit off topic, but it is an interesting thing where I think, although it's a new and interesting way to communicate, it is narrow, and that is causing lots of problems.
And also the fact that a lot of the interactions are happening so discreetly. I mean, discreetly meaning away from the larger social context, means that there's no pressure being imposed on these interactions. It's like, what women are often upset about the way guys are interacting with them on these medium. But it's the anonymity that allows guys to behave in these ways that they don't really like very much. In the past, it's like, you had to be out around people. And if you were a guy who was acting like some kind of weirdo, that would have a real negative impact. But now it's like you can be some kind of weirdo, and there's, you have access to millions of women over the internet, and none of them are going to find out that you're the weirdo.
Yeah, that's very true.
So, I think that there's kind of a thing here where the, people are, and especially women, I would say, are in a much more dangerous situation in their dating lives now, because they don't have that social protection or that social structure that forces men to behave in a certain kind of way. Now, granted, you could argue that they benefit too, because they also don't need to conform to certain modes of behavior. But, it's definitely a trade-off.
And it still comes down to the base, I guess, two basic points. And one being that if they behave in a way that, if a guy meets them on Tinder and he has a reasonable chance of getting some girls off Tinder, if they behave in a way that he doesn't like, they can just next her and find another girl on Tinder reasonably easily.
Right.
And so that's like not good for them. And then the other thing being that they have the whole risk of getting pregnant. So for the dude, he can like run to Mexico or something, but for her, that's like a really debilitating thing.
Right. And also don't forget about the other risks. I mean, women who've showed up at a guy's house and gotten killed, for example.
Or
gotten beaten or whatever. I mean, there's lots of, beyond pregnancy, there's lots of possible negative outcomes.
So there was another thing I wanted to ask you about that I thought was interesting that we started discussing before. It was basically in the West, and I think originally I thought it was a religious thing, but then I thought about it and think it's not. The whole obsession about women being virgins.
Yeah.
So about 15 minutes ago, we were discussing this, and what I've noticed is that as all these different countries keep plodding along, women being virgins seems to be less and less important.
Mm-hmm.
And originally, I mean, I thought it was a purity thing pushed by Christianity and a bunch of other religions. But then thinking about it, and on our conversation today, I mean, I don't think it's actually about that at all, because in China, they're really big on girls being virgins. And I mean, I remember when I first got here, almost all the guys I would talk to would say that they want to marry a girl who's a virgin.
Mm-hmm.
That was just like a requirement.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember dating a girl, her parents would like send her to hospital. It was like the first girl I knew in China, although I met her on the internet before I got here. Anyway, she would get like, her parents would try and get her virginity checked like every 6 months or something. So we stopped dating pretty quickly. And she remained a virgin. But that's neither here nor there. The point being, this whole obsession with virginity was a pretty big thing in the past. And I wonder if that's changing, because we do now have technological ways to figure out if the kid is our kid or not, and other things that impact the importance or lack of importance for virginity. So like we have laws that can help both sexes or hurt both sexes in this way too.
Right.
Whereas, so I guess my point is that parentage verification via virginity isn't such a big thing, because technology's enabled us to sidestep that, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And if I may inject a bit of humor in here, I thought that the reason why maybe virginity became why guys were so into virgins is because, in the old days, if you weren't a virgin, you were almost definitely a mother already. And the only way to ensure that your girl was going to have a fit body was if she was a virgin.
Okay. I guess so.
But speaking to this concern, he mentioned in his book that blood and DNA tests conducted in Western hospitals suggest that about 1 in 50 children is not sired by the father of record. In some studies, the mismatch is considerably higher.
So going back to when we were talking about sperm wars, I remember the statistics from that was saying it was like maybe in the 80s, it was like 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10 children aren't.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
statistically, what you read in that book, do you think that's gone up? Like it's like 4 out of 10 or what? How do the statistics carry across?
I'm wondering if maybe I'm wondering if maybe I think that it's likely that this number would decrease. I mean, I think that the number of fathers raising somebody else's kid is probably decreasing. And I think it's probably decreasing for a few reasons. One being that I think a lot more, the birth control means that women are purposefully getting impregnated by the particular man that they've decided to have children with, instead of, being, going out, having a great time, meeting some hot guy and banging him. They're probably on birth control. And if they maybe if they suspect, maybe they take the morning after pill these days. If they're worried about pregnancy, then that might be more common. So I suspect that it'll probably go down, and although some will still slip through.
So I actually assumed the opposite, and I understand that this is probably very different from country to country for various reasons, but I was thinking for the West, it would actually go up because there seems to be a greater divide developing between being like an alpha dude who just bangs a lot but doesn't invest in girls and being a beta provider. And that essentially the provider guys are just going to be used to provide. So you've got like more and more single mothers who have gotten pregnant from the alpha chad, and the alpha chad's off banging other chicks. And then they go, oh, well, now I'm 30 or a bit past 30 and I should find like a nice guy to settle down with. So they find like the beta provider guy who's willing to take the worst trade deal in history.
Right. But I think that in this case, more typically, the way it works is that the women already have kids. And so the guy knows that the kids aren't his because she already had them, but he's willing to support and take care of these kids anyway for sexual access.
Yeah. So I guess I'm saying that for these beta provider guys, they're not able to get the girls until they hit the wall, so to speak, or close to the wall. So then they end up with these girls that used to be banging a lot of alpha chads who are then willing to marry them because they realize they can't get the alpha chads anymore. But on some level, they have contempt for these guys because they don't match up with what they're actually attracted to, which is the alpha chads. So then they, on the side, go and get pregnant from the alpha chad and use the beta provider guy to raise the kid. I thought that would be happening more and more based on what I see of general social dynamics in the West.
Yeah, I mean, that's also possible. I think I have a less dark perspective on human nature than you do, and maybe that's accounts for my optimism. My optimism is that guys sign up to take care of other dudes' babies, not that they're tricked into it.
Okay.
More so.
Fair enough.
Yeah. There's only one other thing in here that I wanted to mention, and that was this thing that I mentioned briefly yesterday about the peacemaking in the males versus the females. So it says that let me see if I can find it here. Right. Reconciliation among male chimps may be edgy, sometimes even unsuccessful, meaning that the fight starts all over again. But they never include trickery. Males carry their tension on their sleeves. Between close buddies, he's talking about two chimps, such as Yorin and Nikkei, during their joint rule, one male may get upset if his friend does something he dislikes, such as inviting a sexually attractive female. He puts his hair up and starts swaying his upper body, hooting softly, giving off an immediate signal that something is amiss. If the other objects to these objections, a confrontation will erupt, which most of the time will be quickly reconciled. Male chimps make up easily, in contrast to females, among whom tensions tend to linger. It's not unusual for two female chimps to meet and suddenly start screaming and yelling at each other, even though I, the observer, have not the slightest clue as to what may have triggered the outburst. These incidents give the impression that something has been brewing under the surface, perhaps for days or weeks, and that I just happen to be present when the volcano erupts. This never occurs among males, mainly because males signal hostilities and disagreements openly, so that things are always, quote unquote, talked out one way or another. This may involve overt aggression, but at least the air is clear.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who's like, oh, monkeys and apes and humans, nothing in common. Oh, it's all lies. We're made by God in the sky or something. When you see this point, it's just so insane, because anybody who's ever lived with a woman, and I don't think mums are actually that great of an example, but girlfriends definitely are. There's going to be some bullshit that happened like 6 months ago at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday that they remember, that they're all upset about for like 6 months, and then they bring it up, and there's a problem that they have about it emotionally that they haven't dealt with. And it's like, we don't even remember that.
Yeah.
And it, like, what are you talking about? But yeah, it's humans and apes exactly the same in this regard. Exactly the same.
Yeah. This is particularly among the chimps. Among the bonobos, it's reversed apparently.
Yeah, well, you're saying the bonobo men are basically the betas in the monkey ape world.
Right, exactly. Right, it says bonobo males lack the intense cooperation in hunting, political alliances, and territorial defense that forces male chimpanzees to preserve unity. The tendency to reconcile, then, is a political calculation that varies by species, by gender, and by society. Paradoxically, the level of aggression says little about peacemaking. The more aggressive gender may be best at making peace, and the more peaceful gender, worse. So, so it's the reverse. It's based on where the alliance structure is. So, among now, so this is so actually, so it seems that men's alliances are so important that they reconcile quickly, whereas their alliances with other females are not nearly as important. So because of that, they don't need to reconcile, but they try to avoid conflict in the first place. And he gave an example of like two bonobo, I think it was bonobos, can't remember, but he gave some example. Oh, here we go. No, I can't find it. He gave some example of some female apes. I can't remember if they were chimpanzees or bonobos, but basically they supported different males to be the alpha. And he said that during that time, they mostly tried not to interact with each other very much. And but once everything was resolved, then they just continued on as friendly as they were before.
Yeah, well, it just sounds so typical. It really does.
But it's so true. I mean, what the example you gave, I think this is why I always say that if your woman seems totally happy with you, you know that you're in deep shit.
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
I mean, because it basically means that whatever it is so incredibly bad that she's trying to pretend like it doesn't bother her. Whereas if it was something that wasn't a big deal, she would just tell you.
Yeah, I agree with you on that totally.
So yeah. So and here's another example. This is an example from humans. He says, let me see, here it is. Subtle aggression does not fade easily, as reported by the Finnish researchers. They found that discord among girls outlasted that among boys. If asked how long they might stay angry with each other, boys thought in terms of hours, sometimes days, whereas girls felt they might stay angry for the rest of their lives.
Oh, this is just so typical.
And this was a discussion by Finnish researchers. Where was this done? Do. Anyway, I can't remember, but this was some research that was done at like a high school or something, or an elementary school or something like that. But yeah, it is typical. Here's another one. This is talking about a swimming coach interviewed about her switch from training women to training men. The coach found working with the opposite sex, meaning working with men, far less stressful. She explained that if two young women, this is a swimming coach, so she's talking about the swimming team, so the female swimming team and the male swimming team. She explained that if two young women got into a fight at the beginning of the season, there'd be little chance of their getting over it for the remainder of the year. The fight would be festering day after day, sapping the team's solidarity. Young men, on the other hand, had tons of fights, but in the evening, they would drink a beer together, and the next day, they would barely remember the fight. For boys and men,
I mean, this.
Rivalry and hostilities do not stand in the way of good relations. Yeah, so there you go.
Yeah, because I guess going back to the OG days, we needed to be able to be chill with each other more quickly so we didn't get killed by a saber-toothed tiger or stomped by a mammoth.
Right.
There was a company a few years back that was all women. Let me just find it.
Oh, I think you mentioned something about this to me before, maybe.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just read the very first part of this article. Over in one corner sat Alice, a strong-minded 27-year-old who always said what she thought, regardless of how much it might hurt someone else. In the other corner was Sarah, a 30-something high flyer who would stand up for herself momentarily, then burst into tears and run for the ladies' room. Their simmering fight lasted hours, egged on by spectators taking sides and fueling the anger. Sometimes other girls would join in, either heckling aggressively or huddling defensively in the toilets. It might sound like a scene from a tawdry reality show such as Big Brother, but the truth is a little more prosaic. It was just a normal morning, prosaic, in my office. The venomous women were supposedly the talented employees I had headhunted to achieve my utopian dream, a female-only company with happy, harmonious workers benefiting from the absence of men. And anyway, if you just like Google all-female company, it'll come up. And basically, it's just this woman who thought she'll start her own company with only chicks because men were the problem. And long story short, she lost a lot of money, and it was just a total shit fight because all the women would backstab each other and have ridiculous reasons, like their cat was sick, so they couldn't come to work and they were sad about that. Or all these other things where, okay, if you have a problem today and you're fighting with this girl or with this person, the next day you cool down a bit, you can tell them they're being a bit of a prick, but you'll just move on and get the job done. They just couldn't do this, as you were saying.
Right.
And this company essentially just imploded
Mm-hmm.
because the women would constantly be fighting each other. And here's an interesting example. There was an argument about makeup and fashion and various things. And anyway, it said, it didn't take long for the office to become divided between the girls who wore makeup and those who didn't. Comments from the former were typically, doesn't she know what spot cover-up is? Or has she ever met a hairbrush? While the non-makeup clan were equally biting with comments behind their backs, naturally, such as, people on the morning bus must think she's a prostitute, or she looks like a slapper. The obsession with appearance meant nearly all the staff were on diets. If I bought a tuna mayonnaise sandwich baguette for lunch, I would overhear staff commenting that I was a pig. I'm a size 12. Two of the skinny girls often snidely said about the largest girl, I'd kill myself if I got that fat. One of the assistants got her own back on the food police, or one of the assistants got her own back on the food police for several weeks by pretending to buy them fat-free lattes, which were really full fat. So it's a bit silly, but I mean, it just goes on and on, where they just wage social war on each other for the entire existence of this company. And I don't think many people left the company going, "Oh, I guess we can we can get over this and still be friends." It was just everybody hated everybody, and
Right.
everyone bailed eventually.
Right.
So
Well, yeah, you should
pretty
send me that link, and I'll include it I'll include it so that people can check it out.
The one I just read's a Daily Mail article, so I'll send you a link, either that one or one that I think is.
Okay, sounds good. All right, well, I think that's everything I wanted to say about that book.
Okay, and one last thing, I just looked up that article of various links on Google, and the funniest thing is a Reddit link, and it's for the section on Reddit which is called the Red Pill.
Oh.
And when I clicked that link, it came up with another page that said, "This Reddit or this subreddit has been quarantined. Are you sure you want to continue?" That's kind of crazy.
Interesting.
But anyway, so yeah, I thought today's discussion was really, really good. I thought it was great. And for those of you who are listening, if you have a particular subject area that you want to hear about, feel free to contact us and let us know what that is. Otherwise, we're just going to keep discussing the things that we like to discuss, be them monkey, ape orientated, or otherwise.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, yeah. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you got a lot out of it. And thanks, Kane, for being awesome.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to do that.
Always do what you do best.
Exactly.
All right, and I'll see you next week, man.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
It's going to be a great week.
Yeah. All right. Catch you later.
All right. Bye-bye.